Good evening. My name is Danielle Figuera. I'm the Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement here at Landmark. This is my fourth school year here. I welcome you all with open arms and wish we could be doing this in person, but I think a silver lining of being online is we're reaching many more parents than we would if we did this at a 9 a.m. coffee during the school week. So I'm so happy to have a variety of you here tonight. So thanks for being here. I'm going to run over a few housekeeping notes just to keep in mind. Firstly, this is being recorded, so please remember that. You can go ahead and mute yourselves now, and if you haven't already, please change your name in the settings to reflect your full name, where you're from, and your student's grade, if you don't mind. And then perhaps also in the chat, you can introduce yourself. We'd love to see who's here. Tonight's event will be fully recorded, and then afterwards, usually will take us about a week to get the recording and the slides to you after the fact. So feel free to just sit back and enjoy and listen to the presentation. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can put those in the chat. My colleagues Michelle and Kim will help us filter through those questions, and we'll answer those at the end. So as they come up throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end and address those. I also want people to know that tonight's presentation typically would be hosted by the Landmark Parents Association, the LPA, but this year we've embarked on a new initiative between the Advancement Office and the LPA working together to co-host this new series called Landmark Learns, where we bring content to parents, things that are relevant and timely. So you'll be seeing more of these coming up throughout the year. The next one will be focused on motivation, and we're really happy to share these with you and thankful to have faculty who have committed additional time to making this possible for us, and they're certainly the experts in the arena. So I will mute myself. I will ask everyone to please mute yourself as well, and I will pass this to Ariel and Katie. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. So I'm Ariel Martin-Cone. I'm the Assistant Academic Dean at the high school. I've been here for, I think, 16 years. I've done a couple different roles and positions, but I've been in this role for 6 years. And then I'll turn it over to Katie to introduce herself, and then we'll jump right into the slides. We anticipate it'll take us about 20-30 minutes to get through slides, and we want to make sure we leave a good solid 15-20 minutes at the end to go over your questions. So here's Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, and I'm the director of the Expressive Language program at the high school. This is my 12th year at Landmark and my 6th year in this role. So I'm excited to get to meet all of you and talk to you tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So if you came here early, you saw that my slides were up, and I realized in a panic that it said Landmark Learns, and then the date was October 27th, 2002. And multiple people proofread this presentation, and none of us caught it. So I feel like that's a good indication of how 2020 is going. So it's actually 2020. And we're going to talk about executive function in 2020. So we're going to talk about some of our best practices and kind of guiding principles around executive function as a ground level template for teaching and supporting executive function. And then we're going to talk about how we're shifting, changing, flexing, adapting this year to address executive function in a virtual environment, in a hybrid program, and just in the world of coronavirus, which has tipped a lot of things on their head, even if your student's fully in person. And I know we have some families from the elementary middle school, which is awesome. So know that some of how we approach executive function is going to be slightly different at the high school because of our age ranges, but should feel familiar to what you're seeing at the elementary middle campus. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about Google Classroom and how it works, because that's the platform that our freshmen and sophomores and most of our juniors are on. If you have a senior, they're going to be using Canvas, which we can speak to, but we didn't do slides because the majority of students are going to be in Classroom. We're going to talk about what executive function is as a concept. For some of you, that might be super familiar, and for others, you might not have spent time thinking about what it is. We're going to go through the 6 domains of executive function as defined by Thomas Brown, who's a researcher in this field that we think does really good work. And again, kind of contrast, compare, build upon executive function in 2019 versus 2020. And then we're going to spend the last slides or so thinking about how you can support your students at home. So Katie and I are educators. We're also parents. So we're going to talk to you from a professional lens, but know that we're also deeply invested in raising children who can manage their time, their emotion, their information, and their materials. And we want to help you guys in that pursuit, because those efforts benefit us in the classroom as well. And then we'll end with your questions. So please do put any questions you have in the chat as we go, and then we'll try and go back through them kind of chronologically to answer them. Okay. So Google Classroom, Landmark is a Google school. So we use Gmail, we use Google Docs, we use Google Drive for file management and storage, and then we use Google Classroom as our learning management system, which is a very fancy word for a web-based binder. So when we talk about Google Classroom, I want you to think about a backpack. And in that backpack, I want you to think about binders. And I'm sure all of your students have perfectly organized, pristine, fully functional binders throughout the entirety of the year. Classroom, fortunately, does stay pretty pristine, although it can get kind of disorganized. So each of these tiles here represents a different class. These are some of the ones that I teach, and then some of the ones I'm connected to. So I don't teach woodworking, but I just wanted you to see what it looks like. So your student will begin most days and most class periods at the classroom kind of start page, and each class gets a little square, a little tile, which is circled here in yellow. We try to name them in a consistent fashion so they can navigate from period 1 to period 2. They also remember color, so teachers will keep the same color from quarter to quarter, so it's easy for them to navigate and find. So this is the starting place. When they've clicked on that tile to enter the class, there's even more information for them. So underlined in yellow here is the Meet code. Meet is the platform that we use for our virtual learning. So if your student's remote or hybrid, we use Google Meet to connect with them through video conference. Upcoming work is displayed here in the blue box. My student happened to not have any work assigned, which is why it was blank. And there's also a place here where they can post a question, answer a question, share a resource or a material. If you note up here in the middle where it says stream underlined in green, next to it is classwork, and that's where we're going to go next. So classwork is where assignments, resources, materials actually get assigned and live. And each teacher sets their classroom up a little bit differently, just like each teacher would have their binder organized a little bit differently. So if classroom is a binder, the topics within it are dividers. So the packs of 5 dividers that you'd buy, and you'd label them with like notes, homework, quizzes. That's what topics are. So for my student, I have writing, I've got research, the 100 is the book that we're reading, and then informal assessment is what we worked through. And as I go through and create assignments, I tag them or I tie them to a certain assignment or a certain topic, I'm sorry. So it's easier for my student to navigate. The other thing to notice over here on the right in yellow is the class drive folder. So one of the cool things about Classroom is when you create an assignment or create a document, it lives within this classroom. So it's created a digital folder to hold all of these resources so that everything that my student has either been assigned or completed for tutorial lives in the same place, which is awesome. And we like that organization. We could do a ton more about Classroom, but we just wanted you to see that, like, the major touch points, so that as Katie and I talk about it, you guys have a sense of what it looks like. Okay. So what's executive function? I like to think about it through the lens of this article by Howard Gardner, which you might be familiar with from Multiple Intelligences. And he talks about it in a way that I like to think of as a map. And if I'm a hiker or if I'm going out in the woods, a topographical map. So there's different levels, there's different challenge, there's different features that I have to pay attention to. So he says that executive function is the mental process of planning and organizing flexible, strategic, appropriate actions. And it provides a sense of readiness, agency, flexibility, and coherence, which are lovely, big, conceptual words. So what does that actually mean? He thinks about it as intrapersonal intelligence. So how do you think about information that's relevant to yourself and from your experience, self-relevant information, and talks about abilities, emotions, beliefs, aspirations, bodily sensations, self-related representations, both in how you understand yourself, which is self-awareness, and yourself within situations, which is what they talk about as executive function. So if we all lived in a vacuum and we never saw anyone else, we wouldn't really need to organize ourselves in terms of time and materials and information. But your students, your children are all students, so they need to exist within that environment. Okay. 3 more slides and then we'll get to the landmark specific stuff. So the ways he breaks this down is he talks about the first part of executive function is the hill, the goal, the aspirational self, where you want to go, what you want to be, who you want to be. So for each of your students right now, that could be very different. Their hill could be they want to be a high school graduate. Their hill could be they want to be a college student. The hill could be they want to be self-employed. The hill could be they want to be a parent. They want to be a spouse. So for each of your students, that's going to be very different, and it's going to shift and change over their early adolescence, late adolescence, early adulthood. And for each of you guys, your own personal hills may have shifted and changed based on a lot of different experiences. Your skills are what you can do in the service of that hill. What do you have in your bag of tricks? What capacities, what skills, what strategies, what strengths do you have based on your experiences, your family, your culture to address your goals? And then your will is how do you get there? What effort, motivation, or wherewithal do you have to connect your skills to your hills? So if I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I was terrified of dogs, my skills don't really match up with my hill, and I could have a lot of will, but it wouldn't really cross the barrier of my fear of dogs. So you've got to kind of, all 3 things have to work in concert and connection to each other. So that's the theoretical, like drone level understanding of executive function. And now we're going to drop right into the Landmark campus, where if you were to go into any of your students' classrooms, this is how you would see us talk about it and instruct it. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot about this one more slide. There's one thing that I want to address, and this is just kind of a gentle nudge from a parent to a parent. I want you to think about your child's brain as it develops, and the frontal lobe is where their decision-making, their independence, their risk management, their achievement orientation is going to live. And right now, I would argue that all of you guys as parents are either fully or partially your child's frontal lobe. You're reminding them what's important. You're making sure that their backpack is in good order. You've paid the bill for the internet. You're paying tuition for Landmark. You're making sure that they've got good food to eat. You're doing all the things to enable them to do their job, which is to go to school. What we would ask is that as they move through their years at Landmark, that you gently but surely remove yourself from their frontal lobe and allow themselves to be vulnerable and experience some failure and experience some challenge in the service of developing their own frontal lobe capacity. That's not easy. It's not quick. It can be rich with conflict, and it can be super stressful as a parent and as a child, but it's an incredibly important task for them to be their own support system, their own cheerleader, in addition to everything that you bring to their lives and that Landmark brings to their life too. Okay, now we can move on. So how do you identify EF? How do we talk about it? Thomas Brown, who I mentioned, and this is easily Googleable if you want to search it. He's a great writer, researcher about ADD and ADHD, and he wrote a wonderful article about executive function. That's a great starting point. So he breaks executive function into 6 clusters, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because Katie and I are really going to highlight each of these categories, but I wanted you to see it. So he talks about activation, focus, effort, emotion, memory, and action. And those are all well and good, but what do they mean, and how do I get my kid to do their work on time and not fight me to get out of bed in the morning? Landmark has teaching principles that we've had in place for our 50-year history that we think are really tried and true. There's 6 of them here. I think Katie and I would argue for 2 amendments. We would like to add don't assume as the 7th teaching principle. So don't assume you understand what a student's experience has been. Don't assume they can do something until you've seen them do it. And don't assume it's easy, because it's most likely challenging. And then the 8th would be don't do for the student what they can do for themselves, which is kind of the same idea as being their frontal lobe. So the nice thing about our teaching principles is that they line up really closely with Thomas Brown's categories of executive function, slightly different order, but same categories. So providing opportunities for success connects to activating. Using multimodal and multisensory approaches connects to focus. Microuniting and structuring tasks engages effort. Ensuring automation through practice and review connects to memory. Providing models helps enable action. And then including the student in the learning process addresses their emotional needs and emotional growth. All right, so we're going to go through each of those categories. I'm going to talk briefly about what our kind of standards are, and then Katie's going to highlight how we're shifting our approaches for the classroom in 2020. And I know I went through those past slides really fast. I just want to make sure that we have time for question at the end. So if you have a question or a thought, take a minute to type it in now. And then we'll go through these 6 categories and talk about what it actually looks like in the classroom. All right. So for activation, the key piece that you should see in every Landmark classroom is that there should be an agenda on the board. So the plan for the day, including the date, the day, and your teacher's name, should be written up on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the board every single day. And that seems like a really simple thing, but both Katie and I have done a lot of outreach work and been in with other teachers and in different schools. And this is consistently something that teachers go, oh, I didn't think about that. But what it does for the kids is it sets the expectation and it sets the tone for the day. So they know from the moment they walk in where they are, what they're doing, and what the day is going to look like. We also ask teachers to try and have some sort of content-based warm-up activity. Could be an opening question, a manipulative sort. It could be a review of the previous day's work, but something to kind of let them process the transition from moving around, talking with their friends, whatever conversation they just had, into an academic setting where they're now focused on a task. So those things are still happening, but they now look a little bit different in 2020.
So our teachers are responding to classrooms in which our students are all 6 feet apart, wearing masks. We may have students who are joining us through a Google Meet. So we're really trying to level the playing field as much as we can for all of our students. So in addition to having an agenda on the board, teachers are posting that agenda in the Google Meet. We found that instead of just having it on a slideshow, having it in the chat of a Google Meet provides our remote students with that same support that they can go back to. We're trying to support verbal discussions with visuals whenever possible. Jamboard is one of the tools a lot of our teachers are using. And the graphic on the slide is an example from my classroom. And in addition to doing content-based warm-ups, teachers are incorporating more social emotional learning, or SEL, discussion questions to really just foster connections between students and help them transition into the classroom. So a lot of the same strategies, just a little bit more creativity.
Mm-hmm. So once if you think about like the lifetime of a class, the 50 minutes of a class, the first 5 minutes or so are used settling in, going over the agenda, doing a warm-up. And now you try and pull the focus of the students to a specific task. And in the classroom, we try and focus their workspace, their physical environment, to highlight that task. So it's one worksheet on the desk in front of them, or they're all opening to the same page in the book and focusing on one thing. There should be an observable, explicit, do now type task so that they can achieve something quickly, feel engaged, feel productive, with a manageable amount of time. So we would never start a class and hand a kid a 10-page packet and say, this is due at the end of class, and then go back to our desk, sit down, check our email, drink coffee. That's not the way that we would run our class. It would be one manageable task with a reasonable amount of time given. The next 3 things we could spend hours talking about, so I'll preview them and I'm happy to explain further later. But we ask teachers to think about the difference between task and purpose. So what's the task that you're asking students to do? For example, write an essay. And then what's the purpose of that essay? Are you really focusing on sentence structure, or is this more about research and note-taking? Or are you highlighting proofreading? And depending on what the purpose is, can you shift and flex the task to be more focused for the student so that they're not doing all of the skills all of the time, because that creates fatigue and confusion for the students of what they're actually working on. Click and clunk is it's a nice phrase to help explain to students the feeling of when you're getting it and it's making sense and you're with the teacher and everything's kind of clicking, versus when you fall off the track and you're kind of clunked. So for me, I've been in so many Zoom meetings, I'm sure many of you have too. There's often a moment where I realize I don't know what the last person who was speaking, I don't know what they said. And I have to scramble to figure out, oh my God, were they saying something to me? Was that just an off comment? Do it like, where am I in the landscape? And I kind of like try and reorient to where I am. For me, that's my moment of I clunked, I went off the tracks, and now I've got to put strategies in place to make sure things are clicking again. Students need a lot of rehearsal and anticipation of what that looks like and how to recover from the clunk, because it can feel bad, it can feel embarrassing, it can feel nerve-wracking when you've kind of clunked out of step with your classmates. One way that we do that to try and make that thinking visible is through active reading strategies. So that could be underlining, margin noting, highlighting, 2-column notes, summaries at the end. I always give my kids Post-it notes to tuck in their book, and after they read an assignment, they have to write, 1 bullet per page. So it's a way of making their task that was internal visible. And it also requires them to switch their set from listening to writing, or from reading to speaking. And that's an important task for our kids to work on. So those things still exist, but now we're also doing a couple more things to supplement the 2020 environment.
Thinking of a clear workspace, we try to recreate that digitally for our students. So really explicit modeling. We will present on a Google Meet and we'll project on the board. Here's how you navigate through Google Classroom. And we give them 1-step directions so that they don't get lost in the digital mess of it all. We also are working on active reading strategies, in addition to some pen and paper strategies, also things like including an article in Google Docs and teaching students how to highlight and use some of the tools within there, margin noting through comments, and then asking students to do something with that article. So I put in this picture, I had embedded an article from the Boston Globe, asked students to highlight in it, and then ask them, okay, copy and paste one of the quotes you found and tell me why you highlighted it. So providing a little bit more explicit instruction than just, what did you think of the article?
Mm-hmm.
I think multi-sensory approaches are an important part of focus as well. And I know that our teachers are getting really creative with Google Drawings and some other tools to try and bring that to the digital world that we're kind of navigating.
Mm-hmm. Totally. All right. Effort. So from a teaching perspective, we ask teachers to think about pace, volume, and complexity. And you guys might notice this as parents when it comes time to giving your kids a verbal list of tasks to do. So the pace is the speed at which you throw information at them. We got 5 minutes to go. You got to get your shoes on, you got to get your backpack, you got to brush your teeth, and you got to grab that granola bar. If I give my kid, who's only 7, but if I give her those directions, she's going to go, what? Because I went too fast. So you got to slow down to a pace that they can take the information in. Although sometimes pace is important because it indicates that we got to move fast. Volume is the amount. So that many tasks for my daughter, she would never be able to remember. I don't know that my husband would be able to navigate that many tasks given to him verbally, quickly, at a shot. So if I want them to do one thing at a time, then I'm going to say, I need you to get your shoes. And then as a teacher and as a parent, I'm going to wait until they have gotten their shoes. And then I'm going to say, great, put them on. And then I'm going to wait until they put them on. As a teacher, we think about this in terms of, are we writing 1 paragraph or are we writing 3? So and then how quickly are we going to do that? Is it over the course of 1 class period, or is it stretched over the course of a week? And if we're writing 1 paragraph, are we writing a summary, or we're just going through a timeline of events? Or are you analyzing deeply a quote, drawing in research and context and author perspective? So a 1 paragraph assignment that takes a week could be suitable for a freshman who's brand new to Landmark. It could also be suitable for a senior who's in senior research and trying to really dig down into the meaning of a quote that they've worked a long time on to understand. So pace, volume, and complexity are really important levers for us as we think about individualizing instruction. Worksheet design and expectation is a crucial part of that. How we ask students to do a task and the space we ask them to do it in is really important. And if you've had students who've struggled with math or science because they didn't have enough space to write their answer down, or it didn't make sense to them where they were supposed to write their answer, That's exactly what we're trying to alleviate, because I'm sure you've seen math worksheets where their solutions are crammed into these tiny little boxes and they can't read their numbers. We've tried very hard to break out of worksheets that limit space and increase frustration, and just let them do their work as they need to. And then we build in regular and routine processes of review, both of tasks and skills covered, and of effort and productivity. We try and give kids evaluations on individual tasks and also productivity over the course of a grading period, the quarter. And then really clear grading rubrics so they understand what's expected, how it's going to be graded, and then how to break their grade down into different categories to know how to do it better next time.
So in 2020, the pace has been adjusted to accommodate and give some transitions to alleviate fatigue. So we're still working towards the same curricular goals, but we are responding to the students that are in front of us who do seem fatigued just by all that's going around them. Just as Ariel was talking about oral directions being one step at a time, we're really trying to do that with our worksheets as well, 1 or 2 step directions. We're playing around with docs. Some of them are live and collaborative, so students in a class might all be working on the same doc, in addition to a homework assignment where it would be individualized. We're doing a lot more quick formative assessment, especially our students who are all in person. They're behind the mask, they're in their rows. So just a lot of check-ins are really important. So doing a thumbs up, thumbs down, can you rate 1 to 5 your comfort with this, so that we know how to adjust that pace in response to what the students are giving us. We're also doing some informal assessments using, again, Jamboard, where students can do more of a manipulative. And because we're working in the Google platform, Google Suite, we're introducing Google Forms because that is not as familiar to our students. So just giving them some exposure and practice with that. In addition, Ariel and I were just talking about conferencing with students about how they're doing, and then also building in some self-reflection so that students can share with us, whether it's written or in person, how they think they're doing as well.
Awesome. So in terms of your effort, you're halfway through this workshop. We're halfway through our 6 categories. So we got 3 more, probably 10 minutes, and then we'll get to your questions. You're doing awesome. All right, so if you've activated and you've focused and you've put forth some effort, then hopefully you've learned something, you've engaged with a task. So now the job is, how do you remember it? And how do you pull up that memory when you need it later? So for immediate feedback, we like to use proofreading checklists, or what we call a notebook check, that tries to make a memory task visible and routine. So a proofreading checklist, we want to instill the importance of revision and editing, but we don't necessarily expect that the students remember every task that they need to do in the process of proofreading. So we create a checklist that's individualized to their skill set, and they use that to guide them. Notebook check, similarly, in person, what that looks like is the teacher sets expectations for, I want you to have a 1-inch binder, I need 5 dividers, they need to have these labels, you got to have a pen, pencil, highlighter, and papers have to be in the right section. And then every 2 weeks or so, they would physically check the binder to see if things were in good working order, where they were supposed to be, and they had all their necessary materials. We're doing the same thing digitally. We're just checking the state of their desktop and of their Google Drive, which, if I'm being forthcoming and honest with you, my email is a complete nightmare, and it's really affecting my own organization. So this skill, I think, is crucially important when we're really operating digitally. Reference systems, which Katie will talk about, specific to like now times, but we have a long sort of history with flappers and interactive notebooks. So a flapper is a note card, just like a regular 3x5 index card, that has a topic, a concept, a type of equation on one side, and then the solution, an example, the definition on the other side. And you sort of stick them in sequence so you can see the front side and then flip the back side up. And those references are really useful, both for in the moment, like remembering, But I think students also feel proud when they see a visual statement of how much they've gone through and how much they've learned, because they can come right back to it and see what they've gone through. Interactive notebooks, same concept, just instead of one piece of paper with note cards taped, it's a notebook that's got lots of different pages with folded over like flaps to lift up. And those have been really helpful for kids in math particularly. The metacognitive strategies are like the bigger picture piece that your student's advisor, their counselor, or as they become a junior or senior, their teachers are starting to talk about. The one example I'll give, and I told Katie I would only do this if we have time, so I'll try and be quick, is this idea of sense and relevance. So again, my daughter's in elementary school. And the other day I dropped her off and there were some police cars at the entrance and they were going to do an intruder drill, like a lockdown drill. And at the end of the day, I was expecting her to tell me about like what the intruder drill was like. But what she told me about was the fact that she was really excited that I'd put a chocolate chip granola bar in her lunchbox. Because what was relevant to her is her lunch. The intruder drill made sense. She understood it while it was happening, but it wasn't relevant to her life experience. She's never had to deal with an actual crisis, thank goodness. So she experienced it, but it wasn't in her memory bank. It wasn't at the tip of her tongue when she came home, which is partially why when your kids come home and you ask, how was your day? What did you learn? They say, fine, nothing. Because it's not necessarily in that space of relevance yet. It might've made sense in the moment, but what they're thinking about is what was happening on the bus drive home. Are they hungry? Can they watch TV? Is their phone battery dead and they need to charge it? That's what's relevant to them in that moment. So we need to do the work to help them take what we're teaching in the classroom and help it become relevant. Sometimes that happens over the course of a week, a quarter. Sometimes it takes years. And sometimes I'm sure you guys have noticed it takes until they become the next stage of themselves. So it might take them becoming an adult and managing their first job and paycheck to really understand why algebra matters. And we have to be okay with that time frame really shifting depending on who your student is and what their experiences have been. But we're aiming towards relevance as we work on skills and strategies. So that's like big picture stuff. More immediately, do you want to talk about memory, Katie?
And nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
So we are still providing these supports for newer students. We're still giving them the checklist, but we are making these tools more easily accessible to them. So we're probably going to embed the checklist right in the doc that has their graphic organizer and their template, just so they aren't, like I said before, managing a ton of different tabs. We are using the topics in Google Classroom intentionally, so creating reference topics. So in my class, I have a tab called Writing Resources, and I have familiar templates in there. I also have grammar references in there. But we try to transition students from being given those resources to, through the grades as they gain more skills, getting them to access them. So our senior LA classes, they're going to a Google site to access the graphic organizers, templates, and checklists that work for them. So that's kind of the goal, to get them to access it. But in the beginning, we are providing those tools to them. Some other strategies, just cueing strategies, asking students to repeat, rephrase, reverbalize directions. We're teaching them different cueing strategies, trying to get them more engaged in what types of cues work best for them. In really utilizing visual supports, whether it's word banks on the walls or a spot in classroom that they can go to, but just giving them access to these tools that will give them that prompt that they need.
Awesome. Okay. So we talked about activation and now we're in action. Activation is like in the moment, like turning the car on. And then action is how do you drive? So we might have gotten them to a task, but then how do they understand how that task fits into the larger day around them? So we need to think about time awareness, and we need to think about like long-term action plans. So a few minutes ago, I told you, we're halfway through the workshop. You're halfway through these slides. We got 3 more to go, and then we'll get to your questions. The goal of that is to give you kind of a halfway warning. So I'm not telling you when we've got 1 minute to go, okay, what are your questions? Let's go right now. I'm giving you time to gear up to assess, like, do I have to go pee now, or can I wait? Do I need a drink of water? Or like, it gives you a chance to kind of respond. And we try and do that in the classroom as well. The 5-day study plan, we're going to share our midterm exam plan with the high school families pretty soon here. And all of the classes will go through at least 5 days, often more like 10 days, of how to study for a test. So we don't ever send students home and say, test tomorrow, study, because what does that mean? How do you do it? How do I know if I've done it well? How long does it take? So we break it down into daily tasks that are observable and achievable, and kids feel like they can grasp them and then become more independent with them as they go. So you might have a senior who's in a senior elective science class who is told, you've got a test on Friday, you need to study. But then the key question is, what are you going to do tonight? And asking the kids to state an intention and an achievable goal. And we do a lot of scripting, both for emotional work and also for academic work. So all of our writing classes use the 5-step writing process: brainstorm, organize, rough draft, edit, final draft. And that's a crucial piece of our instruction, and that will always remain. And I think that's a crucial part of how we do a lot of our instruction.
In addition to everything Ariel just said, we are given that explicit technology direction. I think the key piece is providing models, projecting on the board, presenting our screen, especially if it involves technology or homework when we're not home with them. For example, I have my students do videos through Flipgrid, and I always provide a model of what their video should look like, just so they can go back to it when they've probably forgotten later on. We also encourage the use of tools and visual reminders of deadlines. So what's nice about using the Google Suite is there is that to-do list on their stream of each class in Google Classroom, and that syncs up to Google Calendar. So explicitly teaching students how to use those tools in concert. Most of our classes, especially younger or classes where students are really building the skills, we are doing nightly homework or maybe a 2-day assignment. But with seniors in the expressive language program, for example, those students through Canvas are working on monthly independent writing prompts. So teachers are going over the prompt on the first day of the month in detail, brainstorming together, and then they're providing reminders throughout the month. And students are in charge of seeking out feedback if they want it, but they need to get it passed in by the end of the month. So we've got that long-term assignment. And then on a smaller scale, our students also have weekly discussion prompts that are really built the same way. A lot of discussion on Monday about the expectations, some check-ins, and then it's due on a Friday. So we would not do that with our 9th grade students, but we do think that that's really good practice for our students who are going to be leaving Landmark after this year.
Awesome. All right. So the last one, I'd argue that for most students, especially right now, this is the most important one. And I think it's probably the one where you guys have spent a lot of time, and that's emotion, identifying, managing, resolving, sustaining emotional health and well-being. So a few years ago, Katie and her colleagues in the Expressive Language program introduced the work of Michelle Garcia Winner and the Social Thinking Institute, which I've linked there, but you can Google it as well. They've got resources, I was just looking, from ages 4 to 17. So it's not specific to high school. It's a broad range of strategies, but it's really dedicated to the work of translating the social world into one that's explainable and observable by students and adults who might have a hard time engaging or understanding why their conversations aren't going the way they want them to go, why their feedback isn't being heard, or why they're having a hard time engaging with others around them. So we started using the language, instead of inappropriate behavior or appropriate behavior, we switched to expected or unexpected, because it let us talk about what are the expectations of a classroom? What does it look like, sound like? How does it feel? And what happens when you have behavior that's unexpected in that environment? What does that do to the feel of the classroom? And the shift there is a semantic one, but we think it's important because inappropriate conveys judgment that they've done something wrong, that it's not okay. And unexpected behavior isn't necessarily wrong. It just indicates that the student needs additional support, guidance, scripting, or practice to meet the expectations of their environment. And we feel like that fits with our students and our faculty a lot better. We talk a lot about advocacy, how to do it, when to do it, where, with whom, why. and how to do it effectively. And this is not an area that connects to parenting style. There's a slide at the end where we'll talk about different ways of engaging with your children if there's a moment of conflict or frustration. But how you manage your emotions, how you communicate them, how you model them, has a lot to do with how your child understands, internalizes, communicates, and models. My daughter adores making lists, and I'm sure that is because I also adore making lists, and that is an activity that we do together. That doesn't mean that she's going to be necessarily more organized, but she sees that it's something I value, and she's still in the state of life where she wants to make me proud, which is wonderful. But I'm not going to assume that as she gets older, list making is going to become one of her chosen strategies, but it might. Katie, what else are we doing?
So this year, we're finding that everyone benefits from this review of expected behavior, given the new environment with social distancing and wearing masks and being in a Google Meet. There's been a huge change to what we call the hidden curriculum, the hidden rules of a given situation, depending on where you are, who's in the room, what time it is, all of that. So it helps to really talk that through explicitly and to include ourselves, the adults, as part of that. Masks especially limit our ability to read intention. We really only have students' eyes and maybe their tone of voice, and they're so far away. Sometimes they're shouting to us. So it's really helpful to just have those conversations and say, it's really hard to read your face right now. Are you confused? As opposed to just responding to what's in front of us. We're building in a lot more informal social conversation to address the loss of kind of normal high school time. School looks different this year, so it's really important that our students feel safe in the classroom and safe to take those academic risks. So we are spending time to build community in our classes, whether it's through those warm-ups or kind of leveling the playing field. Teachers are assigning, video recordings where students get to see each other without a mask, because it's just those little things that you kind of take for granted when you don't get to see your teacher or your classmates smiling. So I'd say that the teachers are really focused on this particular aspect of executive function, really making their students feel safe and comfortable at Landmark this year.
Awesome. All right, you guys made it through. So I'm going to just read what's on here so you can hear it. And then I'm so excited to hear your questions and see what you're thinking and hearing and feeling in your homes. So Katie and I took these categories and we thought about, as parents, how do you connect this? Because we just talked to you guys for about a half an hour about what we do as educators, but you guys are here as parents. So for activation, I would think about, how do your students know what to do and when? What are the routines they have at home that you've kind of figured out and have made clear? For focus, can they identify when they're not focused, or do they not see it? And what does it look like from your end? And if they're not seeing it when they're not focused, can you explain or demonstrate what behavior you're seeing when they're not focused? For effort, what are their roadblocks? Beyond their phone, beyond the internet, what is it that gets in their way and prevents them from working better, harder, or longer? If they say they can't remember, if they say they've never learned this, if they say my teacher didn't teach this, I don't have any notes, I would start by gently questioning, where are your resources? What's in that topic in your classroom? Do you have any templates? Where's your binder? Do you have an email from your teacher? What's the assignment say? What are the directions? And I know that some teens have a 2 questions per day limit, and that you as a parent might not be able to get all of those questions out. But that's what we would do if we were next to them, is sort of go through, all right, what do we got in front of you? For action, like we talked about, doing that oral rehearsal, what's in front of you? What do you got? What's weighing the heaviest on you? What do you need to do first? That's that triage piece. And then for emotion, thinking about, and this can just be a reflection within yourself, with your partner or your spouse or with your students, how do you guys respond to conflict or frustration in your family? What's it sound like? Where does it happen? How does it make you feel when other people are expressing emotions? And can you work on that with your child if that's something that's getting in their way, if that's one of their roadblocks? All right. You guys, that was a lot of talking. I hope you're still with us. Thank you for listening. So we have 10 minutes officially, but Katie and I can happily stay on longer if we're not getting to all of your questions. And I think both Michelle and Kim are cataloging them for us in a document. So if there's ones where you need individual feedback or you really hope to connect with someone directly at Landmark, we can do that. But I will stop sharing my screen so I can see you guys. And
Ariel, do you want, hi everybody, this is Michelle Gurney. Sorry, I missed you at the beginning. I've cataloged everything. Do you want me to go
Awesome.
through them based on sort of order of slide? And then we can open up to more live questions?
Sure. Why don't we, yeah, let's do that for a few minutes and then open up live before people have to go to all
Perfect.
the other things they need to do.
So there were a couple of questions that were very specific to some of the early slides, which I'll sort of go from the start to then. So relative to the slide that you gave about effort, there were a couple of questions that I feel like were specific to this. So somebody asked, how do they show you that they're fatigued? So like, what would be some signals that parents would want to keep in mind with regards to like how they know that a student is fatigued with regards to the effort that they're putting out forth?
So physically, it's this. It can be a postural change. So they were sitting up and now their head's on their elbow or they're slouched over. But what's tricky about teenagers is that doesn't always indicate fatigue. Sometimes that can indicate comfort and like they know what they're doing. So that doesn't necessarily set off alarm bells. This is not usually a good posture though, no matter what. We usually start to see distractibility, either they're distracting themselves or others, and we start to see avoidance when they're fatigued. So their pencil needs to get sharpened, they've got to pee, they need water. Did you watch that show last night? What do you think about this guy? Those questions that are kind of like sweet and charming are generally indications of fatigue or frustration. And we try and engage a little bit and then redirect back to the task.
And someone also asked relative to this about this concept of like, give them one step things to do at a time. Is it helpful to slowly give one or two more steps as they manage their time better? Like
exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
So, you know, again, 7-year-old, not a high schooler, but we've gotten to the point where I can say, I need you to pee, wash your hands and brush your teeth. And then I usually check in halfway through and say, don't forget to brush your teeth. But so you can escalate the volume and the complexity of the instructions.
I give an example, just like filling out a graphic organizer. When students are first learning how to do that, I take it one box at a time. I'm like, let's all work on the first detail. But once that skill becomes automatic, I might say, okay, everyone, what you need to do now is fill out the details and elaborations in your graphic organizer. So once they've really gotten those skills, you can kind of bunch them together into now it is one step for them. They know the expectations for that.
And there was a question at this point in time too on the effort side about is it possible or helpful to incorporate more pen and paper tasks, just decreasing screen time as well as incorporating different ways to retain information?
Yes, the answer is yes. I think we're trying to figure out the balance of how to do it. And really when we came back to school, our focus was so much on let's get the classroom stuff situated and figured out and digital learning like instructed, because we thought we were going to have 2 weeks. And now we're finishing up week 10. So I'm starting to see, and I'm starting to use in my own class more like, can you grab a piece of paper? Let's draw this out and then show it to me on your screen so I can see what you're doing. And I do see that shift happening in classes because it's a crucial learning tool. And it's also just like, we need to have things off of the screen. So yes.
And I think it's helpful just even in my class, like I've had to really assess my students' comfort with that. Are they comfortable receiving a piece of paper from me? Because every student has a different comfort level about being in school. So I think just making it as clear as I can, like I took this off the copier, I used hand sanitizer, I'm giving it directly to you. It sounds silly, but I have found that some of my students really benefit from hearing that. Another strategy that I've been using is I gave every student a page protector, and that is now their whiteboard. And I asked them to get dry erase markers. So we'll do that to give them a break from, all the worksheets on the screen. So again, I think we are adjusting to what we thought school would be like. And then, we've been in school for a while, so trying out different strategies.
Yeah.
And one question came up, but I think it's kind of related to this too, around the memory. It came up during the memory slide about, is it being remote, is it more difficult to teach the students? Is it more difficult for you as teachers, but as perhaps too from the students' perspective? Now you've got not only whatever your time it was in the spring, but also these months under your belt. Sort of as you reflect on that, it's a loaded question, but.
I mean, I would say yes and no. I think it's definitely different, and some aspects have proved really challenging, but I think we've found that our methods are translating and the kids are responding. And I think I'm working with 2 families whose students are fully remote, and I think they would say that they feel like their students are getting having a good experience. Certainly things to improve and change and work on, but they're having a landmark experience. And then I'm tutoring a student who has been fully in person for 2 years, but this year is fully remote for a variety of reasons. And I check in with him every couple of days, and it feels like he's having the experience that he wants. He's learning the skills that he needs. He's engaged. And it's incredible to me that your students are engaging in this platform for a full 7:50 to 3:13 day. It's unbelievable. So it is harder in some ways, but it's like double as worth it, because it means we have access to these students that we would have lost otherwise, either because they couldn't attend or because they wouldn't have come to us. So I think it's hard, but we're really grateful to have the opportunity to teach them remotely.
Yeah, I'd say we just have to use different tricks. I can't walk right up to a student's desk to get their attention the way that like maybe tapping their desk was a strategy that I would always use. But I do think the feedback loop is really important. Some of my students have had to be remote for a day, a week, whatever it is. And just keeping that communication going has been really helpful to make sure that we both have a positive experience. And I think that's where we talked about advocacy before, making sure students feel safe and comfortable advocating for their needs, whether it's, you forgot to present the screen, or I can't hear what the students are saying. That feedback's really helpful. So I know our teachers are getting better and better at it, the more that they engage in those conversations with students.
So there were a couple of comments that came through and questions about, and it was relative to the action slide, about our favorite topic, which is cell phones in class, that seem to be distracting this year. What's your strategy for helping students manage their cell phone use in class? And then related to this also, it's a big distraction for kids to be able to text on their computer and use Google Chat sort of while so their ability to multitask, but perhaps not making the right choices. Yes.
And I would argue it's also challenging for the adults. There's been multiple times when I've caught myself in a meeting, not listening because I'm chatting on the side. And it is not ideal. And I think it's important for us as teachers and parents to recognize that the things that they're struggling with, we are also trying to figure out how to navigate and do appropriately and respectfully. I think with the cell phones, we wanted to have students come back to school, period, and then figure out what we needed to manage, control, discipline, kind of differentiate. So we didn't set a standard or a protocol for cell phones beyond asking them not to have them out, just like we didn't really we changed the dress code to relieve it so they could just come to school and be with us. And now that we've been in and we've gotten great parent feedback about like, I'm checking my kid's cell phone plan or data usage, and oh my gosh, are they on that phone all day long? And working with individual students to make sure they hear clearly from all teachers, your phone has to be away in your bag. And if it's not, here's what we're going to do. Here's the consequences. For the texting on the screen and texting in Google Chat, I think that's a trickier piece because the laptop's an essential device right now. So we can't take the laptop the same way that we can take the phone. But it's a lot of conversation, like Katie's saying, about that feedback loop of if I ask you to do something and there's a delay because it's clear you're typing, but you're not typing anything related to what I'm saying, then we need to talk about what you're doing and how are you using your device. With the Google Docs is kind of a lovely way to benevolently spy on what they're doing, because you can be watching the screen live. And if you hear their fingers on the keyboard, but nothing's happening in the doc that they're supposed to be working in, it's a helpful cue that there's probably something going on. It is complicated by, like what Katie said, there's a little bit less freedom to move around. I think in previous years, we would have teachers right behind your student, right at their shoulder, looking at the screen and giving them immediate feedback and oversight supervision about what's happening. It's a little bit trickier to do it from 6 feet away, but our teachers have good eyesight. They can still see what's going on. So I know that the number of students that we're talking about right now that have cell phone issues isn't overwhelming, but we've probably got, I don't know, 4 to 6 that I can think of where the cell phone's really an observable distraction in their day. You guys might tell me that every single one of your students needs to have their phone taken away, and we could get there, but we're trying to respond and triage based on what's really disrupting learning versus they might need to be a little bit more patient and wait to after class to text.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Discuss a little bit about how these learning strategies help in college, where the pressures and deadlines and remembering are very different than what they're experiencing now. And there was another question relative to this as far as just sort of, I'm trying to find it. My son graduates this year and I'm concerned that he may forget the skills he's learned as he needs support, guidance, and reminders.
Mm-hmm.
How do I help him in college when I've not learned
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what he's been taught? So supporting post-Landmark.
Mm-hmm. So I'll kind of flip it a little bit. I actually think that our students do an incredible job of carrying these skills and strategies with them. And we hear from a good number of alumni that they are the best note taker in their college class, or that they've been hired by the support center to be a note taker for other students with disabilities. So we do have students where these skills are transformative and become such an internalized part of their process that they're independent with them. It doesn't mean that they spell everything right. Doesn't mean that they get everything on the first take and they might need to review and use their resources, but their ability to use this strategy is often really excellent. So I would give yourself the potential of feeling confident about that, depending on who your student is. I would also remember that they've got, wherever they are in their progress, they've got this year to finish. So we've got some time to make sure that they get a lot more practice and rehearsal. And then, like Katie talked about, teachers have spent a lot of time, especially senior teachers, putting together resources that travel with your students. So the Google site that will live after Landmark that exists for templates, the proofreading checklist that the kids done so many times, they tell you that they could memorize it, but they still have it with them so that they can remember. And then they still have us, and you guys still have us. So I would say that Katie and anyone who's teaching at the high school still gets emails from alumni asking for help on a specific paper, asking for help figuring out how to advocate. They come back and tell us how it's going. Typically, the kids that say they can't wait to graduate are the first to come back to campus after they do. So I think there's a little bit of a rubber band between us and your children and their experience here and what they bring with them. It doesn't mean it's perfect. And it doesn't mean that everyone succeeds at their first plan on the first try. So if your child wants to do college, traditional four-year college, and they enroll right out of Landmark, it could go great. They could need to take a step back. They could need to shift schools. They could need to take a different path. There's a bunch of different options that we try and prepare them for. Knowing that your family values, what's important to you is a crucial part of that, but that we want to prepare our students for a variety of outcomes. So it's a long-winded way of saying we really have found that after students spend a few years with us, they actually do have a pretty intact skill set, despite our very best worrying about whether or not they're ready. And Katie and I are in meetings together 2 or 3 times a week, where the core of it is worrying about what does this kid need? What more can we do? How can we get them to June and really be ready? And it eats up a lot of our emotional energy as well, making sure that your kids are as ready as they can be for what comes next.
Yeah, and I would just say, it goes back to what Ariel was saying earlier in the presentation, providing those moments of challenge senior year.
Mm-hmm.
The example I gave about the monthly writing prompts, if a student doesn't reach out for help and the paper's late, they get a bad grade on it, but they have an opportunity the next month to figure out, how can I advocate for the support that I need? So taking away a little bit of the scaffolding and expecting a little bit more independence senior year. There is a learning curve to that, but we would much rather that they experience that with a group of supportive adults who can help coach them through what they need to do, rather than hold their hand through all of high school and have them kind of do it on their own. So I know it can be uncomfortable in the moment, but it's certainly intentional.
Relative to the emotion slide, a question came up with regards to, do we feel like they have much less opportunity to bond and form friendships because of the COVID restrictions this year?
It's definitely different. And I think returning students that had a friend group are having, well, it's not generalized across that. We've got some returning students that I think are socializing and finding connections and have similar outlets as they have in previous years. And then we've got some returning students where their best friends are remote or hybrid and not there every day, or they're remote and hybrid and not there every day. And then we have new students, either new to the high school from EMS or new to the school in total. And it's different. I think for some students, it's taking longer to find their people and to find their connections. I think what Katie said about the mask it's really important. And we, like, I've worked, Landmark has been the only place I've ever worked. It's my only job, for better or for worse. So the people that I work with, I've grown up alongside. I am having a hard time navigating my relationships with them on campus because of the inability to read their face. So just for our students, it's really hard. And it might seem like your students aren't connecting as much as you want them to, or it's not happening as frequently as you'd like. And I would validate that that's probably true. I think we're trying to do as much as we can to put things out there in a way that's safe and responsive, and recognizing the fact that by the time your kids get home, my guess is they're done. They're tired. It's been a lot to get through the day. So there's a little bit of a tipping point for us of not wanting to offer too much in the evenings. But I recognize that a lot of you want us to offer more, and we've heard that clearly and are working towards that.
I think the positive is the kids have been great about the masks. They're doing so well with them indoors, and there are just new patterns, new routines, like new outdoor hangout spots that were never there before. So when I think back to that hidden curriculum, like it's just new for everyone, and everyone's just kind of catching up with it.
I do want to just put in a plug. If your child has a particular interest and wants to be around kids that have that interest, we are so desperate for that information. So we have an intercultural club. We have a Genders and Sexualities Alliance. We have a stock market club. We have a student council, and there's a Dungeons and Dragons club. And all of those were mostly led by student interest and student desire. So if your child has a particular game they like to play, an activity, we used to have a fashion club last year. Those kids graduated, but they met every Friday to talk about fashion. So if your student has a particular interest, I would love to hear it. Jeff Fossey, and I can put his contact in the chat, is one of our assistant deans of students, and he's actively looking to try and gather who's interested in what, who wants to spend some time in the evening playing a game or connecting about a topic. But I'm sure, as you know, if we were to ask a teenager, what do you like to do? The answers are not always super detailed.
Great. We have a couple more questions. Some of them are on the more specific side, so I'll go a little bit out of order. Someone asked, a great question. By high school, too much conflict occurs when parent tries to be helpful. And it was maybe more of a statement or a confession than a question, but
yes,
if you want to comment on it.
So this is where I would ally with your academic advisor. And if you're in the Expressive Language or Founders Program, there's a set of them. And if you're on the prep program, it's either Joe Rose, Margot, or Abby Kane. But your advisor is a really good advocate and support for you as well as your student. So if you're getting into conflict with your kid and you're not able to ask questions, or you're not able to get certain information, the advisor can sometimes help you decipher that information, either by just having a different adult who's not the parent ask, or by asking for teacher observation, or just planting themselves in a space where they might overhear your child talking and then relaying that information back to you. So the advisor is a really important team member. If your child sees a counselor, that's another good person to reach out to and see. Obviously, they're not going to tell you the like details of what they're talking about in the counseling session, but if you have conflicts, concerns, conversations that you're just not able to break through with them, we would love to be a part of that process, because we know that that's really tricky.
Great. Can you speak to more ways to address when kids feel stuck about starting a task or procrastination? Also wondering about more strategies to get students to remember tasks one by one without having to verbally feed them each step by step, i.e. things like lists or photo boards or whatever.
So let me take a stab at it. And then I think Katie and her department do a ton of this work. So I think she'll have really good insight. But for the second question first, beyond, because it's a demand on you as the parent to verbally prompt and remind them all the time. And then your voice becomes noise, and Charlie Brown noise that they're not listening to. So if verbal reminders are just kind of fatiguing or not working, I think a list can be helpful. An ideal situation would be to have the kid write the list so that they have the ownership of writing down the steps that they need to accomplish. They could type it, they could text it, they could put it in a note in their phone, they could create it as a reminder. But having them take some ownership of it can be really helpful. You could use a whiteboard on the fridge or in their room. I think pictures can be really helpful for younger students. I think high schoolers don't always respond super well to picture tasks, but some do. So it depends on your student. And then the first question was, remind me.
When kids feel stuck about starting a task or procrastination.
See, I got stuck. So we talk a lot about asking for help. I think it's helpful to remind them to go back to what's actually being asked. What's actually in front of you? What do you need to do? Because oftentimes when they're getting overwhelmed, it's not because of the one task in front of them. It's because they've zoomed out in their mind and now they're thinking about what that one task leads to and all the other things on their plate and the conversation they had with their friend earlier that's kind of sticking in them, in their heart, and they want to take a shower, and they also heard about this show, and then they're like off. So trying to draw them back down to like, what does it say on the piece of paper in front of you? What's that sentence right there? Can you read that to me? Okay, how do you do that? Okay, do that. Okay, now what's that next sentence say? And I understand that this connects to the question you just asked about, like, I can only get so much information out of my kid. I can't do a lot of that verbal processing. This is where feedback to the advisor is crucial, because we want to know how long homework's taking. We want to know how much intervention and how much support you're needing to provide to get them through it. And we want to know where they're getting stuck. So even if you only get that like one question a day ration, if your one question a day is, what are you stuck on right now? That's an important question, and translating that to the advisor. And if the answer to that is everything, that's still important, because it lets us know that they're not deciphering what's in front of them, and that the teachers might need to shift how they're delivering directions, how much they're asking them to do, and how much scripting and modeling they're getting in during the day.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's where routines are really important, and why we really like hammer home the routines in class. Teachers are trying to model self-talk. Mm-hmm. So model the process, model the routine. So then a good way to flip that, like if I'm working with a student and they get stuck, well, what's the first step? Mm-hmm. And really going through that way. Just building off what Ariel said, like a what do you need checklist. That's something that we have in a lot of our classrooms. That's something that I do with my daughter who's doing remote learning right now. I need my binder, I need a pencil, and I need my Google Classroom open. Mm-hmm. Sarah Ward also does a lot of great talk about the gestalt, like what is the teacher expecting? Like what should the finished product look like? Because sometimes students get so overwhelmed and they might think, well, I need my whole essay done, when really, nope, the teacher just wants your first body paragraph graphic organizer done. So I think establishing what should the finished product look like, and then going back, okay, where do I start? That's really important. So they realize it's not a 20-step process. They really just need to do maybe 3 steps, and then they've met the expectation. Teachers are also really good about saying, when you've worked 20 minutes, shoot me an email mm-hmm. and let me know, and we'll check in tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I know we're not necessarily in the homework makeup land that we used to be in, but that's really a routine that our teachers are used to, and they're still encouraging students to do.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And somebody had, at the end, there's going to be a question about additional resources, but before we mm-hmm. get there, I just wanted to hit a couple of more, which just had to do with just to clarify with regards to these tactics that you described in this presentation, just to confirm that all of these tactics are used within each of the programs at the high school, right? So Founders, Expressive, and Prep.
I saw that question. That's a great one. So it's going to look slightly different because Katie and I are giving you like big picture and then some specific examples from the Expressive Language program. The Expressive Language program focuses on 3 classes: their language arts curriculum, the oral expression, and social communication. So math, science, history, electives, tutorial operate independent from that program. So it's a focused curriculum in a couple areas of their day. The approaches that we're talking about are best practices across the board. So they should have an agenda on the board no matter what class they're in, no matter what program they're in. They should have clear and explicit directions no matter what program, grade, or class that they're in. But what you see coming home or what you glimpse on the screen is going to look slightly different depending on program, because it should be tailored to your student's particular profile, skill set, individual need. So the answer is mostly yes, but sometimes no, depending on who your kid is.
So really, I think to sort of wrap it up, there was a lot of, was just thank you and appreciation, but also wanting to learn more. You left everybody sort of with a great taste to like go and get a PhD in executive function. So I think if there's anything that you want to share now, but I think too, Danielle and I, and as we look at the follow-up from this session, we can share out some articles or books or other things that are available either vis-a-vis Landmark directly or beyond. So, but if there's anything that comes to the top of your mind now, please feel free to share.
So I'm like navigating my windows here because I've got too many. But we will definitely share these slides. I think Thomas Brown is a good one to read about ADD, but also about executive function. I'm just going to leave it. Michelle Garcia Winner is the social thinking and social competency. And then Sarah Ward's phenomenal and terrific. So those are 3 names that I would start with. They've got good websites, lots of articles, lots of books. The one I was going to show you is called Smart But Scattered, the teen edition. You can buy it on your Kindle so that the kids don't see that you're reading a parenting book about teens. But they have a great approach to executive function. It's Peg Dawson and Richard Guare. They've got a lot of kind of inventories and like surveys about different categories of executive function and some really good coaching for how to talk to your teen about executive function, kind of on the model of how to talk so your kids will listen and then how to listen so your kids will talk. This is the executive function, like narrow focus. The other one I usually recommend if your student's high achieving and often feels discouraged by what they perceive to be lack of success is a book called The Blessings of a B-. It's an older one. It's short. It's another one you can buy on your Kindle. But it's a great look at how important it is for students to experience what they perceive to be disappointment and then muddle through it and find their way to the other side and not set unrealistic expectations or perceive unrealistic expectations from you as parents. Because I can tell you that the vast majority of students see you guys as the bar that they want to reach, even though they would never admit that to you in person. So your model and your example means a lot to them, even though I know that they don't tell you that.
Great. That, I think, should cover most of us. I think relative to, somebody did ask, is there a place where we can put our templates that parents can access? So those templates that you and Kate were talking about could be really helpful for parents to just have some familiarity with.
Yeah, I think when you guys share slides, there's a couple basic like paragraph templates that we could share that you could kind of interpret and intuit just so you see what we're doing. I wouldn't want to send you anything that's too content specific because you might lose the context. But our paragraph template, I think would be helpful to see how we set it up, maybe like a proofreading checklist. So we can send a couple of those resources. I know this is scary. I'd ask your kid, what do you have? What templates are you using? And when you have parent conferences in a couple weeks in November, I would ask the teachers, what's my student getting for a template? What are they using in this class? Because that's going to be really important insight for you to see the level of support or structure that they're getting. And teachers will be happy to share what they're using with you guys then.
Great. I think I've done my best to try to cover all of them, and you guys have done a great
Awesome.
job answering them and covering a lot in a short period of time. There's a lot of, I hope that you have a minute to read these. There's a lot of kudos on the chat. So.
Great. Thank you guys for joining. Katie and I were talking, we are obviously both parents, but I don't know that I would have signed on for an hour-long Zoom to learn about executive function on a cold Tuesday night. So thank you for joining us and for staying 20 extra minutes. That's awesome. You guys are really incredible parts of the team.
I'll let Danielle sort of close it up and wrap us up. And so Danielle, do you want to make any closing remarks?
Just thank you to everybody. We so appreciate it. The fact that this is our 10th week of school is something to celebrate. And I hope all of you are able to do that on Friday. And for folks that are remote and hybrid, we are celebrating you as well. And we so appreciate you taking the health and safety of the school seriously. And that's why we've been able to make it this far and going strong. So thank you, thank you, thank you to our wonderful expertise and panelists. Ladies, you were fabulous. The lovely remarks are coming in through the chat. And stay tuned for an email from me in the next week or so with this recording, the slides, and any references and additional details and books that Ariel mentioned. We'll make sure to get all of those in there for you.
Yep.
So
Your reading list.
Yes, we'll get you a reading list. And I thought that was a great tip to put it on your Kindle so you don't get
Mhm.
by your teenagers. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night. We'll see you soon.